Well, are you sober curious? Have you tried to say no to a drink? What's the hardest part about that? What have you experienced? And do you want some simple food swaps to change how you drink? I'm curious. Do you know that what we eat can affect our alcohol cravings? And do you think alcohol is affecting your energy, your sleep, or your hormones? Well, I'm excited to share with you today because imagine waking up with more energy, clear focus, better sleep, and balanced hormones, all because you changed your relationship with alcohol. For so many years, we've been misled to think, okay, a glass of red wine a day is good for our health. But what we really are seeing, where the research, the scientific research, is leading us is that no amount of alcohol is healthy. Well, I want to share with you today in this conversation I'm having with Dr. Brooke Scheller, who's a nutritionist, clinical nutritionist. She teaches through her groundbreaking work in functional sobriety. After her own journey to sobriety, she discovered that food, not fear, was the key to healing. Well, it was interesting as I was digging into these topics and this research, and what we're going to cover today is, you know, what about alcohol? Does it have to be black or white? Does it have to be none, zero, ever? Um, where is the fine line? And I covered this deeply, and I want you to go back and listen to my episode on gray area drinking with Olivia Forelli out of Ireland. That gave so many practical tools and tips to help us and also to identify, are we a gray area drinker? What is going on with us? I also want to talk today about alcohol as a macronutrient and why this matters, as well as tactical nutrition habits to help without feeling deprivation, and how to start your own functional sobriety journey. Actually, join me in this functional sobriety journey. If you have questions, I am here to help you with answers. We've got a lot of great content. Listen in to the end. We will be giving some amazing practical tips to get started on your own journey. And let's get started. And first and foremost, I want to introduce you to Dr. Brooke Scheller. Now, she is a director of clinical nutrition and a pioneer of the functional sobriety approach, using science based nutrition strategies to support long term sobriety and vibrant wellness. She's the author of a must get book called How to Eat to Change You How You Drink. How to Eat to Change How You Drink. And she's a consultant across wellness and recovery spaces. She's a keynote speaker and very, very passionate on this topic. So join me in welcoming Dr. Brooke Scheller to my podcast. Welcome, Dr. Brooke, to the Girlfriend Doctor Show. It is so good and long time coming to get you on this show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Dr. Anna. I'm excited to be here, excited for our discussion. And I know this is a topic that listeners are curious about, maybe intimidated by. So I hope that we can break it down and make it easy to understand for a lot of people today.
Well, and more people are curious about it. I was reading some statistics today that it said in the US last year for 2024, 25% of Americans participated in dry January, with only 25% of drinkers successfully completing the month. And the biggest group that participated were our Gen Zers, so those ages 21 to 24. I thought that was interesting.
Gen Z is driving a lot of the reduction in alcohol. We're seeing that as this generation ages into legal drinking age, that they're not drinking as much as previous generations. And so we find that to be a really interesting component to the overall view of how drinking is down in not only the US, but around the world.
Well, and for so long, right, we were told to our comfort, to our joy, that a glass of red wine daily was beneficial for heart health. And that's proven not to be true. And you talk about this in your book, you talk about this in your Instagram and your social media and stuff. And I would like to get your take on this, that trend and now the reversal of that.
Yeah, how convenient that we all, enjoyed our glass of wine and then we heard, oh, it's good for us too. That's a great kind of excuse or reason to partake. And, I recall being young in the early 2000s and hearing this on the news, hearing there's a new study that says a glass of wine per day is going to improve your cardiovascular risk. It's going to reduce your risk of dementia, right? We find that back in those early days of alcohol being studied, that there were a lot of links to it having these positive benefits. And I still hear clients come to me today that still say, my doctor said, have a glass of red wine, even just in the last few years, to improve cardiovascular health. And what we're finding now, there's been a huge shift in the research and the literature. I would say really 2021, 2022, post pandemic, we started to see a lot of research roll out that kind of turned a lot of that on its head, that it's no longer being seen as having positive benefit for cardiovascular disease, and that it's actually even in small amounts in the quote unquote recommended intake per day, that it does have influences, negative influences on cardiovascular disease, on blood pressure, on the gut microbiome, on the brain, and all of these different areas. And so I'm finding that we're really having to rewrite the story for people because we've believed that for so long.
Yeah, yeah. And I had read a story not too long ago that looked at in perimenopause, the incidence of drinking and cravings created this estrogen dominance. And I questioned that. I'm like, is it the estrogen dominance that actually creates, or progesterone insufficiency that actually creates those cravings? And so this is where physiology drives behavior and behavior drives physiology. But whether alcohol, is like good long term for us or not, right? Like, in spite of that, there are reasons not to drink alcohol. And intuitively, we may know this, but especially in midlife, it becomes important, even more important. And you address these topics. I'd love for you to share, why is it even maybe more important in midlife to revisit our relationship with alcohol? Because it has become that, right? It's become this relationship. Oh, my go to evening friend. Oh,
Mhm.
my social companion. Oh, my social lubricant.
Yeah, and a lot of that started early on, right? It's not often that and I do have some clients, don't get me wrong, that come in and started drinking heavier in their 40s or 50s, but a lot of us find that we experienced these habits earlier on, and we created this link or this association with socializing, with pleasure, with stress relief, and alcohol. And so as we kind of get to this point in midlife where we're experiencing more stress, more physical changes to our body, more hormonal changes, more challenges, whether we are seeing kids off to school and becoming empty nesters, or we're kind of going through this grief process in midlife in a lot of ways. And alcohol is an easy solution, for lack of a better word, to some of those feelings or those emotions. And I really challenge people, and what I hope that people take away from this discussion is really just starting to think about what alcohol means to them. And, even from this standpoint of like, a lot of people think like, well, I don't have a problem. Yeah, I'm not an alcoholic, or I don't have alcohol use disorder. And so is it really something that I need to stop doing? And what I always say to people is, I think we intuitively know if it's something that we should be doing or shouldn't be doing. Like, we have this feeling that maybe this isn't solving my problems. Maybe this is making me feel a little bit worse. And so a lot of it is about just trusting that feeling and exploring that a little bit and seeing what happens if we decide to quit or cut back.
No, yeah, I completely agree. That inner voice, and sometimes that inner voice is giving you those hints or asking you those questions for years before you really want to address it. At least it was in my case. And in your book, How to Eat to Change How You Drink, you talk about your personal story and what brought you to be so passionate about and creating functional sobriety. Will you share that with us?
Yeah, well, it really is that experience. And the first few lines in my book in the introduction are, it starts with a whisper. It starts with this like little voice in the back of your head where you're like, hmm, maybe this isn't good. Like maybe this is not making me feel good. Maybe this is having a negative influence on my relationships, my job, my lifestyle. And we have that little whisper, and then it starts to kind of like increase its volume. It gets a little louder, a little louder. And in my experience, I had been feeling like my relationship with alcohol wasn't healthy for a really long time. I'm talking at least 10 years, that I was kind of like feeling this devil on my shoulder, if you will,
I
that
say
it
the
was kind
nasty
of like,
bitch, by the way. I call her the
I
nasty
like that
bitch.
even, I like that even better. The nasty bitch on my shoulder, who's, and is kind of like, we have the nasty bitch here saying drink, but we also have this little angel over here that's going like, I don't know if this is what I should be doing, right? And it creates this dissonance. It creates this cognitive dissonance in that, I was a doctor of nutrition, uh, became a doctor of nutrition before I quit drinking. And there was so much justification, and still is, in the health space around a little bit of alcohol. It's not so bad. Drink red wine. Now, over the last few years, it's drink organic, drink specific brands that are biodynamic and it's better for you. And there wasn't a whole lot of discussion around the way that alcohol influences our gut microbiome, our hormones. When I decided in 2021 to quit drinking, the pandemic had really increased my drinking. I had always been a heavy drinker since teenage years, and I kind of hit my breaking point in June of 2021, and I thought, like, I've got to just try something different. I have to just like explore what life is like. I was really struggling with mental health, anxiety, and depression. I was having GI symptoms. I was having hiving. I was not feeling good. And I was really struggling. And I was about 3 months sober on my journey, had done a lot of different things, including 12-step programs to get some support. But I started following people on Instagram who were talking about sobriety. And a lot of them were talking about behavioral health changes and addressing going to therapy, addressing, these traumas and things. And from my experience and background in nutrition and functional medicine, I'm sitting here going, no one's talking about the gut. No one's talking about hormones. No one's talking about exactly what you said, Dr. Anna, the physiological component of it. This kind of what is driving my desire to do this. And there's part of me that is like, yes, there's trauma and there's things in the background here, but there's also, gosh, I'm drinking so much that I'm depleting out all of my nutrients. I am wreaking havoc on my gut microbiome. I am causing chaos in my hormones, and I am creating this way that I'm feeling. And so it really became something that I had this aha moment really early into my journey. And I said, I got to talk about this. I need to write a book on this. I need to share more about this because I really believe that it's, you know, important for people who have a history of heavy drinking, but it's also really important for the health space for us to start talking about this substance and what it really is doing to our bodies and to our brains and our minds.
Yeah, I definitely want to talk about this too, because in the medical space, I mean, how many times do I see a patient who has a history of breast cancer and they're drinking wine and out? Well, my doctor said that's fine. I can drink wine and all this. And I'm like, okay, well, wait a second. Well, what is that doing to your physiology? How is that really affecting you? And I will have to say, from my own experience, back in 2007, I was, I had reversed infertility, and now I was pregnant at 41, very high risk pregnancy with my daughter Ava Marie, and I wasn't sleeping. I had PTSD, and I had 3 hours of sleep a night. And I was on my healing journey around the world, and I went to see one of the leading psychologist and a homeopathic psychologist in Germany, Munich, Germany at the time. And, was talking to him about this, and he wanted me to try different homeopathic options of different things. And yet, he said to me, I'll never forget this, because I did rely on this. And so he said, a glass of wine is better than depression in pregnancy. Completely true. But it's like, okay, when, where, really, what's the benefit of that? But definitely, um, was something that I remembered and acted upon during that time. Very rare, but still, it was like, okay, a glass of wine is better than depression. We definitely want to search into that, but really how alcohol can actually further feed depression and anhedonia and loss of dopamine. And I think that's a really important piece. So when we have, like, respected members of our medical community saying, oh, it's okay to have a glass of wine, oh, it's okay, we get further justification. And so I think it's really important that we lean into the current science. And and I've had for many years, right? That it was always the Italians are drinking a glass of wine with dinner every night, but they're not alone. They're with friends and family. They're having very much, good home cooking and such good community and lots of laughter. And, that's oxytocin. That's not the wine. That's the oxytocin that's helping with longevity from all those good feelings. And so I think it's important when we've looked at, when we've said these things in medicine, that we really understand what's right for us. And it's not necessarily black and white, is it?
It's not. And I think what strikes me when I hear about what this German uh, doctor said to you is that there really are some people out there that can have little bits of wine and put it down and it's no problem. And that's a very different scenario than when you tell someone who has a drinking history that they can have a glass of wine. And there's memes about how one glass of wine, well, it's a glass of wine that's this big and it's filled to the top. Or, we have one and we think, okay, well, I want a little more. That should be okay, right? And so I think there's a big difference between our understanding of when we're making these recommendations to clients, it goes beyond, like, we might not know really what's going on with alcohol in their experience. And so it's really about, are we making a safe recommendation to this person based on their history and their experiences? Or is this someone who we really shouldn't be recommending red wine to because that one glass means a bottle or it means more than a bottle? And one glass a day is problematic for people depending on what their health history is. I have people all the time, and this question, of course, comes up a lot on podcasts and other interviews that I do of like, well, is it true? Can you have a little bit here and there? And the reality is, what's your health goal? If your health goal is you're trying to reduce breast cancer risk, you're trying to improve hormones, you're looking to lose weight, you're looking to balance your digestion. If you have a specific health goal, and you're drinking alcohol, there's a good chance that there's a connection there in some way. And what I find in my experience in working with clients is most of the people that come to me have a history of drinking, whether they're actively drinking or have recently quit, and they have a health condition. So I'll use one client of mine who came to me with IBS, for example. She had tried everything. She had gone to all these different doctors. It wasn't until she quit drinking and we made changes to her dietary habits and gave her some things to support her gut that all of those symptoms completely vanished. And she came to me and said, this is ridiculous that none of my doctors, my GI specialists in this area said, stop drinking. And lo and behold, that's the thing that made the big difference for her. And so it really is, that one glass of wine is different for someone who has a condition that they're trying to manage versus someone who is generally in okay health and really can keep it to minimal amounts.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, and And it is a worldwide issue. It's interesting. One of the things that is in the hormone field, like recognizing that true connection between gut health, the estrobolome, our hormones, right, and alcohol. And you talk about this a lot. And I would love for you to share, okay, what the alcohol gut connection, how's that affecting our hormones and what's
Mhm.
happening?
Yeah, and I think there's so many ways that we could go about it because it's all connected, right? And unfortunately, what a lot of the American medical system does is isolate things to these separate areas. Like, again, and alcohol has fallen into this trap as well, where unless you have a diagnosed quote unquote alcohol use disorder, nobody really touches it with a 10-foot pole. It's kind of like, oh, go to AA or, get a therapist or see a psychiatrist. But we really, as OBGYNs, as nutritionists, as primary doctors, we need more resources to support people on this because I think a lot of doctors don't know what to do or how to point people in the right direction, but they also don't know about a lot of the science that has come out. So as it relates to the gut, there are many studies that show changes to bacterial diversity, a decrease in bacterial diversity. So we see a decrease in a lot of our probiotic bacteria. Hand sanitizer is made of alcohol. What does it do? It kills bacteria. When we drink alcohol, it is influencing that microbiome. And so when we think about it in that way, it really does have an impact on if we want microbial balance, if we want healthy probiotic levels in the gut, alcohol does need to be put to the side. Again, that's really influential, not only as it relates to digestive concerns or digestive symptoms, but also how our gut influences the rest of our body, including our brain, including our hormones. But, it's really interesting to me about hormones and alcohol is yes, there is this, influence on digestion and elimination and how that might play a role. But also, I think we overlook the influence of the liver and how important the liver is for hormone regulation and balance, but especially estrogen metabolites being eliminated from the body. So, part of the reason that alcohol increases the risk of breast cancer is because it decreases our liver's ability to eliminate or detoxify those estrogen metabolites. So, alcohol as a toxin is always the priority substance for the liver to remove. So when alcohol is coming into the body, the liver is going to put a pause on everything else. It's going to say, well, we're not going to worry about cholesterol right now. We're not going to worry about hormones right now. We have to get rid of this harmful substance. And so we see, and what I see a lot is we need to support the liver in order to support the hormones in these folks with a history of drinking too. So there's really all these ways. Also, cortisol being another really important component to it all. That alcohol influences hormones, but again, it's kind of neither here nor there. Whether it's the gut, the liver, the brain, the cortisol, it's the alcohol that we have a lot of control over. And it's really learning about how that might be influencing these pathways.
Yeah, and I think it's again, yeah, our hormones are metabolized by the liver down the P450 enzyme pathways, and alcohol competes. And just think of the burden of the hormone disruptors that we have in our body and the increasing prevalence of fatty liver on top of everything else. So, like, liver detox is part of the foundations, just definitely part of the foundations, and feeling that healthiness. Now, you talk about alcohol as a macronutrient. Can you explain that?
Yeah, what's interesting is I have 3 degrees in nutrition, a bachelor's, a master's, and a doctorate. And we have always in the nutrition space learned about alcohol as the fourth macronutrient. So we have carbs, protein, fat, and alcohol. And technically, the reason why it's looked at as a macronutrient is because it contributes calories. So if we think about uh, protein and carbs contributing 4 calories per gram, uh, fat contributing 9 calories per gram. Well, alcohol contributes 7 calories per gram.
Mm.
So a lot of times, when I was reflecting back when I was writing the book, and I was thinking about, well, what did I learn about alcohol in school? And one of the things I learned is that it's a macronutrient, but we don't often think of it in this way. But if we do think of it in this way, what that leads me to believe is that it's a nutrition topic. It's something that we are consuming, our body is metabolizing just like it would a soda or a snack or anything else that we would consume. And so it really, that gave me a lot of, I think, confidence to be able to talk about this topic from an area of expertise in thinking of it of, how is it influencing the body, our nutritional systems, our organ systems, et cetera. And, aside from it contributing calories, it's not necessarily that the calories are the problem, because I have a lot of people, I call this the vodka club theory, that say, well, I drink a low carb, there's no sugar, it's vodka or it's tequila with club soda, it's very low in calories or carbs. And I say, that's true. But the ethanol, the alcohol itself, is what's creating problems in the body, not necessarily the calories. So I
Right.
have so many people come with weight loss issues and haven't been able to lose weight. And they say, but I drink these low carb, low calorie. And I say, well, your metabolism is shot because your body, your hormonal pathways, your hormone system is out of whack from the alcohol, not from the calories. So
Oh, I
it really
definitely have
is
been part
about,
of yeah, I definitely have been part of that club, like the ranch, we call it ranch water here in Texas, just tequila with club soda, some lime and salt, and maybe a jalapeno muddled in there. But yeah, no, and it was really like we say, okay, well, tequila is thermogenic, it's not going to really have a plus or minus, but it is disturbing the gut and it is affecting hormone detox pathways. So like I think that the big part of that too is that a lot of people fear that giving up alcohol means, deprivation or losing part of their lifestyle, right? And I'm like, okay, now I'm hard line. Okay, deprivation for a while, we'll make some healthy swaps. It's for your best interest. You can do a hard line, but really to support our body, you give tactical nutrition habits that really help people heal from alcohol without that deprivation syndrome.
yeah, well, I think there's a few pieces that contribute to the deprivation, right? First and foremost is what I think most people go to, which is their social lives. How do I socialize without alcohol, especially if this is something I have been doing my whole life? How do I go to a dinner with all of my friends who are opening a bottle of wine and not drink? How do I go to a wedding? How do I celebrate at an event? Or what do I do after a stressful day? Like, what is my habit that I do? This has always been my go to. So there's a lot of fear around that and what that looks like. And I can relate to that big time in my experience. And I even wrote a blog about this the other day, that when I quit drinking, I thought my life was over. Like, I thought I'd never have fun. I'd never go out on dates. It would just kind of be the end of life as I knew it. But what really happened was my life transformed in a really beautiful way, in ways that I couldn't even understand and couldn't even imagine, really. I'm really grateful for that, knowing that and seeing that now and looking back. But a lot of it is just starting to challenge yourself around this. Like, again, back to the black and white conversation, what I suggest, if you're listening and you're thinking, okay, like maybe I'm going to start this process, or, maybe I'm going to, whether it's cutting back or deciding to quit, is just really exploring, like, where is this showing up for me? When there's a trigger that comes up of, oh, the girls asked me to dinner, what am I going to do? Just start to explore that. Does that mean, okay, maybe I try to go and I just have a mocktail, or I just, have some bubbly water? Or do I sit this one out and maybe just relax at home for the evening? So it's not about figuring it all out from the start. A lot of it is just kind of exploring, if you will, the journey. But the true thing that I like to talk about with nutrition is, a lot of people talk about cravings and willpower and not being sure that they have the willpower to say no to a drink. And I believe a lot of that willpower is physiological.
Mhm.
So if we are in a tempting situation, we have had a really stressful day, and that trigger, that craving to drink comes up. It's 5 o'clock in the afternoon, it's, the end of a long, stressful day. What I believe is really happening in that situation is cortisol is elevated from the day, and that stressor is sending, our blood sugar into the tanks. Or also, or it's been hours since lunch, you haven't had anything to eat, and blood sugar is low. And when blood sugar is low, we're going to have cravings. Most of us think cravings for sugar, carbohydrates, but what I find is that people also have cravings for alcohol
Mm.
and the contribution of calories and sugar and carbohydrates. And so, what we do is we use nutrition really strategically to help alleviate cravings and to kind of take away this idea that we need to have willpower. And so a lot of it is, how do we structure our meals? How do we structure what we're eating, but also when we're eating strategically to avoid those cravings, especially in the afternoon trigger times, because there really is a physiological component to these cravings or this feeling of not being able to say no.
Yeah, no, I agree. And so when it comes to that, it's we think about a child who's crying, right? They're always like a baby. They're crying for a reason. They're hungry, they're dehydrated, they have a poopy diaper, or they're constipated. I mean, the physiology affects behavior, and willpower is physiologic. I completely agree with you. And so it comes into the place, okay, how do we use, what's the ideal meals to help with our physiology when you look at it from a functional sobriety standpoint, combining nutrition? And what are some key nutrients and supplements you recommend? And you did a great post on dopamine and the nutrients that are required to build dopamine and how important that is just recently on your social media on Instagram. So I thought that was just so good because we think, because it's so important. And that
Mhm.
right now we're a dopamine driven pulsing society. We're continually wanting that next hit of dopamine, but you can't hit it from an empty tank. So what's going on?
Yeah, well, I think what most people don't understand about all of the neurotransmitters, dopamine, our other feel-good neurotransmitter, serotonin, but also things like GABA, which is our body's relaxing neurotransmitter, that these all require nutrients and amino acids to be produced in the brain. So if we're not eating or getting enough of these nutrients in our meals, but also maybe supplements are necessary, then we can have difficulty with producing these neurotransmitters on our own. So, if we don't have the foundational nutrients for dopamine, we may be seeking dopamine externally. And what I think is most interesting about this is the exact nutrients that we need to produce dopamine and serotonin and the like are the same ones that are depleted when we drink alcohol. Alcohol is very deleterious to our nutrient levels, vitamins, minerals, omega 3s, proteins, etc. Even if we are consuming a pretty healthy diet, if we're drinking a lot of alcohol, it's going to increase our need for all of these nutrients, our B
Mhm.
vitamins, our magnesium, our zinc, our iron, vitamin D, vitamin C, essentially all of our nutrients. And what we often find is that when we're having a lot of cravings, when we're looking for these dopamine seeking behaviors, is we're deficient in a lot of these nutrients. And so there's actually 50 recipes in my book that we use a lot of the foods that I talk about. But something even simple like protein as foundation. Now, protein is very hot, has been hot for quite some time, but remains hot in the health and wellness space. And a lot of us think for muscle building, we need this to achieve a healthy body weight, to obtain a higher lean muscle mass, to help with fat reduction. But a lot of us forget that the amino acids that are the foundation of protein are, again, all of the foundation uh, building blocks to our neurotransmitters. And what happens when we drink is we not only deplete out many of these amino acids, but we mess with our digestive system, which breaks down protein. So I actually see oftentimes people who have a need for digestive enzymes, that have a need for amino acid supplementation, but even just making sure to get more protein throughout the day. And I use protein a lot for blood sugar management and cravings management as well. Strategically timed every 3 or 4 hours or so throughout the day, especially in the afternoon. So if you're someone who craves alcohol in that 5 or 6 o'clock time frame, afternoon snack and having something high in protein with some healthy carbs is going to be a game changer and a lifesaver. And I've seen this work with hundreds of clients, just having that afternoon snack, taking the edge off, and that really not only helping to kind of stabilize blood sugar and ward off those cravings, but also help with supporting the stress too. So there's a lot of ways that we're already eating 3 meals a day theoretically, that we can make these tweaks, whether it's increasing our protein content, getting in more of these nutrient dense foods, but then also supplementing can be a really great way to support these things as well too.
Yeah, and I think, like, there's also compounding, thinking about women on birth control pills, it depletes B
Mhm.
vitamins and magnesium the same as alcohol, and that alcohol, for any of our neurotransmitters to work, we need a good, healthy, um, continuous supply of these B vitamins and vitamin D. For any of our hormone receptors to work, vitamin D needs to be present and optimized. And, so you think too, like, extreme alcoholism causes a neurocognitive impairment such as Wernicke's encephalitis. It's called Wernicke's encephalopathy. And that's where you're like, you think, do they have Alzheimer's, or it's
Mhm.
completely due to that nutrient deficiency. And I saw it early in my, well, not because of alcoholism, but just that nutrient deficiency causing these neurologic symptoms early in my pregnancy, where in my practice, where I had a patient, or actually one of my colleagues' patients, but I was rounding, and she had complete, like, lack of cognition. She was vague, and her husband looked at me, because this is my first time seeing her. Her husband looked at me and she said, "She is not like this. She is sharp. She is smart. She's whatever. She had hyperemesis gravidarum. So she was throwing up for weeks, everything she ate." So I immediately hung a banana bag, and it was like, that completely helped. So B vitamins, magnesium, vitamin C, all this good stuff in an IV, and it woke her back up. But because the progression can happen just slowly over time, you may miss it, but it can happen very rapidly. I mean, we are what we eat ate, I like to say, like we say that. But it does make a difference. And I think that's so important that you focus on this. Like, we have to fill up our tanks, and that's going to help with cravings. Now, what are some, I would like to hear, like, for someone who's sober curious but not ready to fully commit, how could they start experimenting with your framework?
Yeah, so this is a great question. And just to comment on what you just mentioned, I really think that nutrient deficiencies are I see it in 100% of the clients I test, there's some level of nutrient deficiency. And even if
What are
we're
you
eating
testing? What are you typically testing?
well, I typically run a full panel, especially if there's a more extreme history of drinking, a heavier drinking history. I often will run a micronutrient, like a spectra cell test,
Okay.
and look at the full nutrient profile, which also looks at amino acids. It looks at some of the other antioxidants like glutathione, and it really gives a really broad understanding of full nutrient complexity, which in blood work is often challenging. Sometimes we see practitioners running like a B12 or a folate, a vitamin D, a handful of nutrients in blood. If you were to test for other things like B1, B3, B6, you end up with a very large bill because insurance companies don't want to cover it. So usually I look at these specialty labs to get like a one fell swoop quick look at nutrient deficiencies. and there's always something present. In my own, I was super deficient in copper. So we find a lot of these interesting things that you wouldn't necessarily see in standard blood work. But when it comes to just first getting started, I think there's two recommendations I have. One that is nutrition specific, one that is lifestyle specific, and one to just get started is just to start learning more about this. I think that knowledge is power. I think the more you learn about this topic and the influences on your health and how you feel, that you're going to find more inspiration and motivation to want to give it a try. So part of the reason that I wrote my book in the format that I did was, not only is it a tool using nutrition, but it's a tool of how to evaluate your lifestyle and kind of what to do to get started and how to kind of start learning more. So that is one really, really important piece. Listening to this podcast is like an amazing first step, but listening to some other podcasts, maybe that speak about the topic, because you're going to get more information and insight on it, or picking up a book. But when it comes to nutrition, I really think that starting to identify when you have cravings, what is going on. So for example, the reason how I kind of stumbled upon this blood sugar, there's a lot of research, or actually early research from the 90s even, around the influence of alcohol and blood sugar and its contribution to hypoglycemia, so low blood sugar. And, I had learned about this, but I started seeing it with clients. And I had this one client in particular that I was working with, and, she would say, I have these cravings at 5 o'clock. I have to have a glass of wine. And, I said, well, what does that do for you? She said, it gives me energy to get through the rest of my day. It helps me cook dinner. It helps me to do the laundry, do the chores, all of these kinds of things. She was like, it gives me energy. And I'm sitting here going, gives you energy. I'm like, for me, it used to check me out, but I'm sitting here going, okay, well, when was the last time what time do you eat lunch? And she said, well, I eat lunch at noon. I sometimes have breakfast, I sometimes don't. Maybe it's just a bar, and no, nothing in the afternoon. So she's getting home, and I'm going, I think you're hungry. I think your body is actually, you're having a craving. You have poured alcohol on it in the past because it's giving you a little bit of that boost of energy, but also that motivation, that dopamine to do some of these things. And when we start to implement these foods, high protein foods, maybe there's some, additional nutrients there. So you've got turkey roll-ups, and you've got some apple or some other veggies or fruit with it, that you're getting this energy boost, but you're also restoring some of these important nutrients that have been lost in the process. And so it really is just about when that craving comes up, like, what am I feeling right now? What do I need? We live in this society that it's gotten so easy for us to pour anything but looking into our own body on top of
Nourishing
it.
ourselves. Yeah.
Yeah. And so when we're feeling that craving, going, am I hungry? There's a saying in AA and a lot of the 12-step programs about HALT. You never want to get hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, because that's a bad place to be. That's where cravings come in. And hunger, we're talking about that right now. But when we think about angry, lonely, tired, all of those things are stressors on our body. And so when we're feeling stressed, or we're feeling that trigger to drink, sitting back and going, what do I need right now? Do I need a snack? Do I need some water? Do I need a hug? Do I need to call someone and connect with someone? Do I need to go for a walk outside and get some fresh air? And just starting to explore, oh, okay, I went and I took that 10-minute walk, and I came back, and I didn't really want the glass of wine. And it really is just that simple. I mean, it's not easy. It's simple, but it's not always easy to do. And it really is just about starting to, I think, explore this, think about the way that it's linking to your health, and then finding ways to nourish your body in a way that, make you feel full and happy and content and satisfied without needing to pour alcohol on top of it.
I think that also, again, and trusting your intuition. What's that voice saying versus what's that
Yeah.
nasty bitch on your shoulder saying? So we want to make sure that we've got real clarity listening to what our truth is and taking the next right step at a time. Dr. Brooke, can you share a powerful transformation story from someone in your community that really highlights what's possible?
Yeah, I have so many amazing people that I've worked with. I've really been blessed to have worked with men, women, young, older, both in my group settings, but also in one-on-one settings. And just, as an overview, I'd like to say I love seeing that light come on after someone quits drinking or really changes their perspective on how alcohol was influencing them. Because for so long, and this is my experience with it as well, we think that this is like giving us something. We think alcohol is providing benefit. It's hard to let it go because we are very attached to it. Again, whether it's coping mechanism, a social tool, whatever it might be. And I think when people start to have that change and they go like, I feel so much like I'm so happy that I don't drink anymore. My life is so much better. Like that is such a powerful story to me, whether that is their physical health, their mental health, their relationships, etc. I'll share one particular story about a client of mine. We've now worked together for a little over 2.5, I would say close to 2.5 years. And she is about two and a half years sober. When she first joined my programs, she was very on the fence. She kind of sat in the background a bit. She didn't really participate. She was very uncertain about quitting alcohol. And she has at the time a 10-year-old son, and she's wanting to improve her relationship with him. She doesn't want him to go down a similar road. She wants to be there for him, be a present parent. And she really struggled with alcohol and also identifying herself as she didn't want to identify herself as an alcoholic. She had alcoholism in her family. She was really had a lot of like resistance to people seeing her quit drinking as like an admission that she has a problem. And one of the things that I always do, and I talk about this in the book too, is we're not going to solve the problem of are you an alcoholic or not? Because this is like, it's kind of like a nuanced thing. It doesn't really matter in the context of all of it. It doesn't matter to me if you drink every day or you drink once a month. If you feel like it's creating problems in your life, that's enough for you to decide to want to quit. And with this client, she finally got to a point where she had quit drinking for 30 days. And she thought, okay, well, I think I'm gonna, start to go a little bit further. And she's someone who also worked with me one on one. So, we were working to balance her hormones. We were working to repair her GI tract, to replenish a lot of these important nutrients. And we got to 6 months and she was like, well, I don't really know what to do. And I said, well, you just keep going. Like, are you feeling good? Good. Then let's just keep it up. And she's now over 2 years completely sober. She has a completely different relationship with her now 12-year-old son, where they talk about feelings, they talk about emotions. He's in middle school and she's able to kind of have these deeper conversations with him that she said before she would drink alcohol and maybe read him a book and not really have those conversations with him. But she also has transformed in so many ways. She used to be a very anxious, very, very nervous person. She is completely different. She now goes to therapy. Her and her husband go to therapy. She's kind of going down even a deeper path with that. We continue doing work on her hormones and supporting her body systems and all of that. But ultimately, she's a different person. And that wouldn't have been possible without the change in alcohol. She had seen functional doctors for years and years before for, support on these same things, but it wasn't until we unlocked that alcohol piece that everything else started falling into place. And that's just one example of the power of this. And how many times I hear people go place to place to place and try all these different things. And, um, it's not until they unlock that alcohol piece that they find what they're looking for.
I'd say true, like maybe that's true freedom for them, right? It's true freedom and it's trusting in their ability to make good choices. And there's so much to it. You know, I keep playing in this area, to be honest, Brooke. I keep playing in this area. I keep working. It's easier and easier to be without any alcohol. It gets easier and easier. But is it something, so for someone in our audience who's sober curious or our listeners that are ready to begin, is it just stop cold turkey, or what's one simple step they can take this week to support their body and reduce alcohol's hold on them?
Yeah. So I think first things first, it's just about getting a few days off of alcohol. The longer you go without alcohol, the better you're going to feel. Sometimes the first few days are challenging. And if you are more of a heavy drinker, if you're a daily drinker, I do recommend consulting with your doc or with someone to make sure that it's safe for you to stop alcohol. I have seen people in my circles, who have come off alcohol, had seizures, had, difficulty with that if they have higher intake. So you always, always, always want to get some support on that. But really, just getting a couple of days under your belt, I think, is helpful. Picking up some resources, some books like mine, or listening to a few podcasts. I really think that doing a little bit of that every day is helpful, especially in the morning, within the first few hours of the day, to kind of give you that inspiration to get through the rest of the day. We have a 30-day alcohol-free program that we offer through my website that is kind of it's a daily prompt, a daily like task or to do for 30 days, and it kind of walks you through. And that has been really helpful as a jumping off pad for people to not only get some of the alcohol free support, but it has the nutrition support woven into it. And so we've seen that be a really helpful tool for supporting people early on. So give it a try, see how you do for a couple days. If you feel like it's really challenging, maybe it is helpful to, sign up for a course or a community or something that kind of helps give you that motivation.
I think community is always a good thing, especially when you're trying to change a habit, to be around like-minded people. It makes it so much easier to do that. It really does. So, where
Mhm.
can our audience connect with you, learn about your 30-day jumpstart challenge, the alcohol-free challenge, and learn about the functional sobriety?
Yeah, so all of the information on my programs are on brookscheller.com. And that you can find all of we've recently renovated some of our courses. We previously had kind of a bigger, longer course, and we've broken that down into smaller ones. So we are coming out with, actually, at the time of this recording, we're launching a new kind of short course on alcohol-free nutrition. And so it really, again, we've got a little bit for everyone, depending on what your poison is, in terms of nutrition or health and what you need support on. And you can also find there more information about my book, more information about me. And I also work with clients one on one. So if you have a particular health goal or challenge that you're working with, I can help you get through that through the lens of living alcohol free.
Thank you so much, Dr. Brooke. I mean, your approach to sobriety is it right? It's not just about abstaining, it's about thriving through nourishment. And I think that's really like the key word for this episode is that nourishment. So, to everyone listening, take one food based shift this week that nourishes your brain, your gut, and hormone balance. And remember, like resilience, leaning in is, that perseverance is always rooted in your nourishment, filling your own tank, like putting your oxygen mask on and playing with this. There's no harm in going alcohol free and experimenting with this, playing with this, and see what you feel and how what transforms. I definitely see it over and over again in clients who have been struggling with all these things. We're doing all this functional testing, and it's not until they really stop that alcohol that I just had a client last week. It was the one thing we've been seeding for a year. And it took her a year, but she's off alcohol now for 3 months. And she's like, oh my gosh, it was the biggest shift. It just like, I feel so much better. I'm happier. I'm like, more in control of my life. And I think that's true. There's so many ways to go about it. But the true thing is you just making that commitment to yourself, listening to that intuition, that inner voice. So a big thanks again to Dr. Brooke for being on our show. Check out her book, check out her program, and get the support you need. We are worth it, y'all. We are worth it. Thank you for being on the Girlfriend Doctor Show. Please like, subscribe, and share. This whisper of creating a community that can support you to be completely supporting you in an alcohol-free journey. I think that is so important. So we each create those communities. That's going to go a long way towards our own health and our family's health. So thank you all again. Till next time.
Thanks for watching another episode of the Girlfriend Doctor podcast. Check out all the links below for more.